In this video, we will solve quadratic equations using the quadratic formula. To use the quadratic formula, you want to make sure your equation is in standard form, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So you need 0 on one side. And you should generally try to solve by factoring first, but if the equation cannot be factored, then quadratic formula works for any quadratic equation. So first you want to get 0 on one side. In this first example, I'm going to move the 2x and the 1 over to the left side. So I get 6x squared minus 2x minus 1 equals 0. And I'm going to identify my a, b, and c. A is the coefficient of x squared, so that's going to be 6. B is the coefficient of x, which is negative 2. And c is the constant, which is negative 1. And then I plug them into the quadratic formula. So the negative b means the opposite of b. You're going to change b to the opposite sign. So since b is negative 2, it's going to be positive 2 plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. So b squared is negative 2 squared. And notice I put parentheses around that negative 2 before I squared it, because I need to be careful. If I don't do that, I might accidentally get a negative 4 when it should be positive 4. And then minus 4 times a, which is 6, times c, which is negative 1, all over 2a. Oops, that should be 2 times 6. Okay. So we simplify, we get 2 plus or minus, inside that radical, we're going to get 4, and then negative 4, well, a negative times a negative is going to make it a positive, and that's going to multiply to positive 24. And so 4 plus 24 gives us 28 inside the radical over 12. And now we want to simplify our radical. So 28, if I break it down, it's 2 times 14, 2 times 7. So we have a pair of 2's and a 7 that's going to stay inside. So we get 2 plus or minus 2 radical 7 over 12. Now, to simplify this equation, I need all three terms to be divisible by the same factor. And in this case, they're all divisible by 2. So what I'm going to do is divide the top and the bottom of this equation by 2. And all of the terms have to get divided by 2. So I can't just do like 2 of them. Sometimes people will just want to divide those 2 by the same thing. But it has to be all 3 terms. So if I divide everything by 2, 2 divided by 2 is 1, 2 divided by 2 is 1, 12 divided by 2 is 6. And we end up with 1 plus or minus 1 square root of 7. I can just write square root of 7 over 6. And you can just leave your answer like that. Now this does represent 2 answers. It represents x equals 1 plus square root of 7 over 6. And x equals 1 minus square root of 7 over 6. But it's okay to just leave your answer in this form. Okay. In the next example, we already have 0 on one side, so we just need to identify our a, b, and c. A is 1, b is the number in front of w, negative 4, and c is 1. So the opposite of b is going to be positive 4 plus or minus the square root of b squared, negative 4 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is 1, all over 2a. And so we get 4 plus or minus the square root. Inside that radical, we're going to get positive 16 minus 4, which is 12 over 2. We simplify the radical. 12 is 2 times 6, 2 times 3. Take out a 2, leave a 3 inside. 4 plus or minus 2 radical 3 over 2. And again, to simplify this, all three terms need to be divisible by the same number. And again, everything can be divided by 2. So dividing that by 4 by 2, we get 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 2 divided by 2 is 1. And our final answer is going to be 2 plus or minus the square root of 3. I don't need to keep the 1 on the bottom or the 1 in front of the square root of 3. That is my fully simplified answer. And again, it does represent two solutions, 2 plus root 3, 2 minus root 3. And we'll do one more example. In this one, A equals 7. We already have 0 on one side, so we're good to go. B equals 6, C equals 2. The opposite of B is positive 6, so it changes to negative 6, plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4AC over 2A. And we get negative 6 plus or minus the square root of, inside here we get 36 minus 56 over 14, which is negative 6 plus or minus the square root of negative 20 over 14. Now we have a problem because a negative under a radical is not a real number. It's an imaginary number. So at this point, we're just going to say no real solutions when we get a negative under the radical. And that is solving quadratic equations using the quadratic formula.